In this presentation, we will take a look at the fonts and numbers options within the reports options related to a balance sheet. These options will be found in most other reports as well. We will do this within QuickBooks Pro 2020, QuickBooks Desktop 2020. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We currently have the open windows open. In order to open the open windows, you can go to the view drop down up top and go to the open windows list. We're now going to be going into our balance sheet and continue exploring the options in there. We're going to go to the reports drop down in order to do so, the company and financials, and then scroll on down to our favorite report, that being the balance sheet standard report. We're now going to be considering options in the customized reports. First of all, let's change the dates. I like to do that with the range up top by going to the customized reports, changing the date range from 01/01/20 to 12/31/20. That's January through December 2020. And then we're going to say, okay, here's going to be then our standard report. We're going to go back up top. We're going to go to the customized reports once again, this time going to the fonts and numbers. You'll note too that we skipped the filtering options. The filtering options will make more sense in particular type of reports. So we'll spend more time in the filtering options when we get to other types of reports where this will be a useful tool for us. So we now are going to go to the fonts and numbers. Within the fonts and numbers, we have the change the fonts for the various items that are in the report, and then we can change the fonts here, including the changing of the font amount, the font itself. We can change the style to bold, to italic, and so forth. And then we can, of course, change the size as well. We also have the effects, which include the strikeout effect or the underline effect that can be included. And then we have the coloring options. We'll play a little bit around with these so you can get a feel for them. These can be a great tool. They can also be overused, so you don't want to go over the top with it. But if you do a little bit of changes here or there to the QuickBooks report, it really gives a little bit, goes a long way. It gives a feel to your reports that are a bit different than other types of reports, which can kind of make you stand out. Again, you don't want to go too far with them. I would stick with the normal defaults. You also don't want to make default settings that would be difficult to do for other types of reports to mimic that default setting. But once you set the defaults, if you have your customized defaults, then I'm going to close this out and close this out. You can memorize those reports, and then you don't have to do it every time. So it could be a great tool to set some of the fonts to be a bit different if you want to change the title a little bit or memorize some reports, alter some reports and change those titles, then you can do so. And again, that could be a nice touch to have on the reports. Back to the customized reports up top, we're going to go to the fonts and numbers. Then on the right side, we're going to first explore these items on the right side. Then I'll show you a couple examples on the left for changing things like the color and the font and whatnot. So if we have the show negative numbers, normally QuickBooks will show negative numbers with a negative sign. As we can see here for depreciation, for example, we have a negative 775. I kind of like to see them with parentheses, which they will show like this. It'll stand out a little bit more. That's my personal preference. And if you would like to stand out a little bit more, you can make them red. So it'll look like that. If I was to select this, then we'll say okay. Now we have that negative number that really kind of pops out for us, both being bracketed and with a negative number. You can have it just red and no brackets, or brackets and no red, whatever kind of setup you would like to see. We're going to go back into the customized reports. We're going to go into the fonts and numbers. The other effect we can have is the negative trailing the number, which might be useful in some areas. It's not something I'm particularly used to most of the time, so I would keep it with the parentheses. I would generally remove the red brackets. That's just my personal preference. Then we can show all numbers, so we can divide the numbers by 1,000. Note that I can take all the numbers and divide them by 1,000. If I was to check this and say okay. And if we have long numbers, if we have a lot of numbers, then this can be a useful way to display the numbers. So we can have that as a useful way to display. If I go back up to the customized reports, typically if we do that and go to the fonts and numbers, we will also be removing the pennies. So we wouldn't divide by 1,000 and have the pennies there typically. So we would say remove the pennies too. And then there we have it without this sense. We can also go back up top, customize reports, and go to the fonts and numbers, and we could basically have the thousands but remove the pennies, have no cents. The report still makes sense, but it has no cents to it. It has no pennies involved in it. So we're going to have no cents, okay, and there we have that type of report. So then and that can look a lot cleaner. This might be something that's very useful to do. Some people don't want to see the pennies. They just add up. They just kind of plug up the viewing screen, and they don't basically add any more value typically to normal decision-making processes. So oftentimes this is a useful tool to have. Remove the pennies, remove the cents. If we go back up to the customized reports and go to the fonts and numbers, and now let's take a look at some of these changes to the font styles. Notice you could change like individual areas within the report. So for example, we could change just the column labels. If we have a report with multiple columns, like here, the column label, the row labels, the row data, so the actual data, the numbers in it. We have the report totals. So when we go down to the bottom, the total amounts, we can change the fonts there. The company name, which of course is up top here. The report title, so the report title, the report subtitle, the date, and so on and so forth. Let's take a consideration with the report title, for example. If you wanted to customize your report title in some way, then you can go to the change font, and say you want a different font on the report title. I wouldn't choose anything that's too you want pretty straightforward fonts. But if you want something a little bit more bold or something like this, like I wouldn't choose something like this unless you for some particular reason you want a really fancy looking font on the name possibly. But typically I would use a more straightforward font that doesn't have a lot of detail into it. But that's just my preference. Let's choose one that is a little bit different here, so we can say what that'll be like, and then I can apply this just there by saying I could make it larger too. We might say, well, let's make it 16 font. It's already bolded, so let's keep it there, and we'll say OK. And then it's going to give you this default, change all related fonts. And I'm going to say no for this time. I just want to do it to the company name, which is what I have selected now. If I change all related fonts, it'll in essence apply it out all to the related fonts. So I'm going to say no, and then I'm going to say OK. And there we have the company name's going to be different. So I'm not an expert at tying out the best fonts and whatnot. So these are just some options if you're really good with fonts and you like to mix and match and put the fonts together that it looks really nice. Then you can adjust these in this format. We can then go to the fonts and numbers. And if I was to say, do this for a color, for example, if I went to the report title and we wanted to change the color to it, I can make it something like a green color. Here's the color drop down. And we could say OK. And then again, I just want to say no, just apply it there. And then OK. So then we have the color changed. If you want to change something like the color or the font of everything, you can go to the customized reports up top. You can go to the fonts and numbers. And for example, if I was going to go to the company name, or let's go to the report totals, and I wanted to change the font and I wanted to make them all a certain color, let's say, let's say red. And then I said OK. And then if I wanted to change all related fonts, I can just simply choose change all related fonts and say yes, and then OK. And then you can see basically it applied it to all related fonts, pretty much all the fonts here, except for the other one that we had changed previously. So again, you can mix and match with these type of things. I wouldn't go too far with them, but a little bit of your personal touch on the fonts, a little bit of change from just the standard could make your reports pop a little stand out, and might be worth doing. And once you do them, you can memorize them, which will show in a future presentation, so you wouldn't have to redo it every time. We're going to go back to the fonts. If you wanted to revert back, then you would go to revert back and OK. That'll revert it back. Note also, if you wanted to revert it back, obviously you can just close the report and start a new report, and do it again. If I didn't like all the red there or whatnot, I would just close the report up top, go back into reports, go back into the company and financial, make a new balance sheet standard, adjust the dates up top, 2/01/01/20 to 12/31/20, January through December, and then we can just go back in and make any adjustments we need from a fresh report.